Hey, welcome all. Coleman Report Live, July 18th edition. We got a bunch of news to go through. The big news just came through the press release. Senator Marco Rubio, the chair of the Senate Small Business Committee, just released his markup on the bill. I came through 10, 15 minutes ago. We will cover that in depth for next week. I didn't have time to get into that. So I just want to let you know that is there. Hey, Lance, how you doing?
Hey, doing great, Bob. A lot of exciting things happening in the SBA lending world right now.
Yes, very much so. Lance did a great webinar yesterday on restaurant financing, and let's go through some of these poll questions. Joseph, I definitely want to talk about that certificate. That's going to be more important later in the show. But there it is. What have you done in the last 12 months? Choose more than one. How have you ordered your dining options?
Bob, this question is interesting for our participants today, and it should tell you something. The restaurant industry is changing. And
that's
if you have a restaurant,
yeah, that's the whole point of this poll question. Let's see what the results are, Joseph. Uber Eats. I left the Amazon restaurant. Amazon made a big deal about that last year, and I don't think that's going anywhere. Grubhub, Blue Apron, and of course direct with the restaurant. What the point is for this question is Lance and I talked about disruption in this industry. In fact, when we do our monthly industry niche webinars, every industry is being disrupted, and I believe as lenders we need to understand that. But over 50% of revenues these days are now derived from online deliveries.
Well, if you're doing a SBA loan to a restaurant prospect, they need to acknowledge this in their business plan. They need to have a plan for apps, delivery, online purchasing. It needs to be acknowledged in their business plan. Not only that, in the projections, I think going forward, we want to see projections that have categories that identify how important this part of the business is.
And we made a point that there are now 3 different verticals in a restaurant business. No longer does someone come in and sit down. You have to have a takeout capability. You have to figure out how to deliver it, and that you get the same experience of a meal that at your home as you would when you sit down. And that's a big task in terms of how do we deliver this food so it's consistent, it's warm, et cetera, et cetera. So fascinating stuff. But this is just, I always like to ask these questions. I think we need to think a little bit globally. What do you think? And Lance, you nailed this yesterday. You got it right.
Yeah, yesterday I was calculating, my family's been in the restaurant business for 30 years, and I was calculating what the sales were divided by the number of employees. And 39% of our crew got it correct, Bob.
That's right, 80,000. And the reason why, again, we ask this question, and we can quibble whether it's 82,000 or 90,000, whatever. What's more important is for that entrepreneur clearly understands what the break even is. And that's why we're asking that question. We're in an environment where food prices are staying low, but labor costs are rising. So your restaurant entrepreneurs need to be very clear on that.
Well,
Tuesday, go ahead,
Bob,
Lance.
one final comment. This can be a checkpoint for us because, as we all know, when we signed the 1920, we're certifying that we've reviewed and agree that the projections are reasonable. So this could be a checkpoint for us as SBA lenders.
Hey, yeah, that they know their numbers. We did a great webinar with Brent Trulino on Tuesday talking about parish reviews and portfolio reviews. And we asked this question: were you satisfied with SBA's handling of your last portfolio review?
Bob, there's the politically correct answer. There is the honest answer.
We're not tracking answers. And this is consistent. In fact, all the webinar respondents said they were satisfied. We had no negatives. I'm glad to see only 7% of you have a negative experience. So I think that's, we always like to ask these questions of SBA. And it's, hey, Chris Hearn, President, CEO, co-founder, I don't know your exact title, these names of Fountainhead, welcome. You're muted, Chris. Unmute yourself.
Chris is a man of many hats.
All right. Well, let's go to Chris is on for this story. We can't hear you, Chris. You're muted, Chris. All right, I'm going to let Joseph take care of that.
There we go.
Okay.
Now can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Chris, welcome.
Okay, great.
I wanted to have you come on and comment on this. Senator Coons, I don't know where he's out of, but he's introduced legislation which is going to dramatically increase SBA 504 lending to small manufacturers up to $10 million. Now, Chris, I know that you are now just the owner of a 7A license, but you've had a lot of history in 504. What do you think of this legislation?
I think it's great. I mean, I think anything that can improve the programs is very helpful. My only concern is how much is this going to really impact manufacturers around the country? I don't know if anybody took a look at the number of potential prospects that this could help, but my suspicion is this is not a huge number of small business owners out there that can fit within that small window that he's talking about. But anything positive for the program, I think, is very helpful, and I welcome Minnesota.
I'm 100% with you. Anything of these type of changes is great. This is not where we were 10 years ago. We definitely needed to have increases in 7A and 504 to help kickstart Main Street. So I know right now there's a lot of supply out there for lending. So I don't know how much this needs to be done. But I do like the fact that we need less borrower equity injection. So that's always a positive.
Maybe this will be the the elephant's trunk under the tent. I mean, my personal philosophy is I think 504 lending ought to be 90% financing across the board, irrespective of startup or special purpose properties like it is now. So maybe if something like this can happen, this rule change, maybe there's hope for more of that in the future.
Yeah, I don't see any downside to this at all. So I'm glad to see that. What I'm glad to see is Washington, the small business committees, it's the only really bipartisan committee that we have in Washington. And I'm glad to see that they are taking efforts to address getting capital to Main Street. Hey, this came out.
Coons is from the great state of Delaware, by the way, guys.
Oh, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We had a Federal Register notice just came out this morning, increasing the size standards, but that doesn't really affect anybody on this call because it's only increasing the procurement size standards. Lance, we're still operating under the old or the current size standards, which are what, Lance?
Well, I mean, they differ depending on the type of industry that you're in, but as a rule, retail businesses are about $2 million in average revenue. Wholesale and distribution businesses are about 200 employees, and in most cases, manufacturers are 500 employees. But I know you're going to ask another question, Bob, about size.
Called the alternative size standard, which came through during the Great Recession, and that blows everything away. What are we at on those, Lance?
Well, I think that you can't immediately look at it, for instance, a retailer that has $5 million in revenue and walk away from it, because the alternative size standard gives us a way to make small businesses eligible. I mean, their average net worth has to be $15 million. Tangible net worth is the max on alternative size standards. So you could have a retailer doing $10 million a year with a tangible net worth of less than $15 million, and they'd still qualify. The other qualifier is net income on average of $5 million or less. So it definitely opens, don't just pull up the size standard chart and immediately walk away from a project. Always remember that there is an alternative size standard for SBA projects, $15 million tangible net worth, $5 million average net income. And I haven't seen many prospects, Bob, that don't fall under those two numbers.
Well, I was going to just ask Chris, as a lender, have you lost any transactions due to the SBA size standard?
Lost 2 in the last 5 years based on the net income averaging more than $5 million for the preceding 2 years. But both of those companies, one of them got acquired and one of them was going public. So it's very rare for things to go above those thresholds. Yeah.
Very good. Hey, I want to talk about what Brent was talking about in terms of the reviews. And these are one of the concerns that we have as an industry is that SBA has authority now to find lenders. But Brent was going through of all the steps that would happen before it would get to that point. And there's a lot of different, there's letters, there's training, there's conversations. So it's not going to be something where SBA is just going to start sending out notices on fines. It takes to get to that point. I'll go to the next slide, Joseph. And these are, just want to reiterate, these are some of the formal actions SBA can do, and they already have a number of tools in their toolkit. And one of them is obviously they can repair loans, they can deny loans, they can prohibit you from selling to the secondary market, they can greatly limit your ability to lend to certain verticals. So the takeaway from the webinar, guys, is for 99% of us, this is not going to be an issue.
Well, and Bob, they're going to walk through those informal actions before they get to, taking away your ability to sell in the secondary market or taking away your delegated authority. And they're probably going to go through every possible action before they get to the civil monetary penalty. I mean, it's the road lenders.
Now, the big news, which we also think is a positive, is SBA and OCC are doing a joint review of one lender. And I think that's positive because that allows the OCC to get a little bit more comfortable with SBA. And as SBA moves into the regulatory scheme, SBA is going to understand the pressures that OCC is putting on lenders.
It would be nice to get all the federal regulators on the same page for once.
Yeah. So that was interesting. Go ahead, Lance.
Well, I was just going to say, a few years back, one of my friends at FDIC had me come in and just give a general presentation about SBA lending so the examiners could have an idea. I think they walk in and look at an SBA loan and don't really know what to do with it in most circumstances.
One lender I talked to, he was not happy with the OCC because SBA has this big push on making smaller loans. And so SBA says, hey, you can take certain shortcuts. You don't have to just go with the credit score. And they got criticized because they weren't cash flowing a $200,000, $250,000 loan, an SBA loan. And they said, hey, we're allowed to do this. So it would be nice to get these two agencies to be on the same page.
I know of, just incidentally, I know of a situation recently with the regulators, the federal regulators, not SBA, had a Reg B issue. And of course, they wondered why you took both, the husband and wife as guarantors. And the banker pointed to the authorization and said, because the SBA asked us to.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it would be nice to get all of the federal regulators on the same page and probably give SBA primacy in terms of their own programs.
Yeah.
They know it better than the OCC and FDIC do.
Everyone should know what these fees are for when you're putting together your budgets. This is in the notice. So this is what SBA is going to be charging you for reviews. So make sure you get a hold of that notice. And
Everybody should print this slide out because I can't tell you, Bob, how many times I get a phone call saying somebody, got an invoice from SBA for LMS fees and they had no idea what it was. So
yeah, so plan on that in your budget and get those invoices. Hey, these are just some of the questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're talking about the reviews. Do we go on-site, off-site? And Brent was going through that. And the takeaway on this, Lance, is Paris score. And we strongly encourage you to have access to that to understand what your Paris score is. The Paris score is updated every 90 days. And Lance, this is near dear to your heart, but he was talking about the buckets, and we want 20% at the top end. It's a normalized bell curve, 60%, then the 20%, and the SBA really wants to identify all those lenders. And if you're in the top 20%, you're going to have a different strategy review than if you're in the bottom 20%. Lance?
and all of the lenders who have access to SBA One, which should be almost 100%, you can go on to SBA One. In the upper right-hand corner is your Paris score. You can click on it. It's got drop-down links. You can look at how different loans affect the score. But I think it's critical to monitor that in managing your SBA lending effort. understanding how you can improve it by using the information that's in it. But take a look at it. I know there are SBA lenders who don't do that.
Lance, the other news that we have effective July 1, we have a new Form 1050. The reason why this is critical is one of the most common errors is the credit authorization doesn't match the underwriting memo and doesn't match the disbursement. So you're going to be talking about that, correct, Lance?
Absolutely. The new 1050 is a little more comprehensive than what we were accustomed to. The other one was basically just a signature, and the SOP said you were supposed to attach everything to it. You still have to attach proof of disbursement to the 1050, but it does require more information. And Bob makes a very important point that your credit memo, your loan authorization, and your disbursements need to match up. If they don't,
that's the most common error that SBA uncovers.
Yeah, and it's easy to fix when you have a variance. I mean, in most cases, it's unilateral, or you send a loan mod to Citrus Heights to get it approved. But we're going to talk about the new form. We're also going to talk a lot about use of proceeds, how to document it, why it needs to be included in the credit memo, what it looks like in SBA 1, how to complete the form, and what you're certifying. Every form that you sign as a participant lender, you are certifying something to SBA, and you're putting your neck on the line. And it's okay. I sign those forms all the time, but you need to understand what you're signing.
Very good. If you're not getting the secondary market quotes, make sure you're doing that. It's important for your budgeting process. Hey, Lance, we've got this question from Darren. Darren's becoming our new go-to person for questions. And the question is, look, Darren is very concerned about his high origination or high-risk origination in his Paris score. And he says, we have a problem. We're in a high unemployment area. Does that, and we have borrowers who don't report to D&B, does that translate to a high-risk origination score in our Paris score?
Well, and I think further information from Darren, because I had a phone call. Well, we had a phone call with Darren. He also is in an area that's kind of, I think, a resort. There's a lot of restaurant and service-related businesses, which tend to lead toward more high-risk originations. Guys, we talked about the Paris score earlier. If your bank is strong in other categories, and you have some high-risk origination, that's okay. SBA's SOP doesn't say we have to make great loans. Chris, you agree with that? It says we have to make them according to the SOP.
That's right.
So it's interesting. SBA then will take a look at the loan and various aspects of the loan and make a determination of whether they think it's high risk or not.
Chris, in your shop, what is your strategy from the C-suite on managing your Paris score and disseminating that information throughout your organization?
We share it on a monthly basis, and we're trying to make good loans. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we're trying to comply with SBA regs and make good quality loans. It's not much more complicated.
How much of a management tool have you found it to be useful for you?
Well, we're still a little early in the process, to be honest with you, Bob. Ask me that question in 3 or 4 months, and I'll have a better answer for you.
One of the things, Bob, that I like to do with it, that high risk origination list that you can get on SBA 1 when you click on your pairs drop down. I like to, in the past, I'd bring my SBA lenders into a room, put it up on a big screen, and just talk about the loans that end up on that list and kind of help guide the lenders on what types of loans, don't end up on that list, and hopefully encourage them to pursue more opportunities in that way. It is a way to manage the lending process. So it's important to understand why a loan ends up on the list and what loans you have. An example of a loan that I have had in the past that's on the list, it was a restaurant loan with very average guarantors, not bad guarantors, and it ended, because of the industry and strength of guarantors, it ended up on the list. On the other hand, Baba had a restaurant deal that had real strong guarantors, did not appear on the list. So.
Yeah, no, that's hey, it's interesting. I like following these stories, and rural America, it's becoming more difficult to operate there for labor issues. but also something we forget. Iowa, there's a lot of it that doesn't have internet, doesn't have cell service. And that's difficult. It's just interesting in reading this press release from Marco Rubio. He said the last time the SBA was reauthorized, only 40% of us had internet in our houses. Now I think that number has got to be well over 90%. So another situation where it's showing we don't recognize it every day, but the world is really changing.
Well, it's just like the restaurant webinar that we did, Bob. I mean, the restaurant industry has changed dramatically in the past 5 to 7 years.
And it's going to change dramatically in the next 5 years.
And most of it's related to technology.
Yeah, and I think when we're making these 5, 7, 10-year loans, we need to have an understanding of what's happening in technology. And just ask a basic question. If you got that manufacturer in Iowa, what are you doing to get cell service there? Because that now in today's day and age, that can be a great impediment to try to operate a business. Very quickly, we're still not too late to sign up for our trainings. Do that. Joseph, I want you to go back to the certificate at the very beginning. And this is all available for you to download. Please download those. One of the things that Brent was talking about, thank you, is what are you doing for training? This certainly counts as training, so make sure you download these and put them there and put them in a file. There's a number of things that you have to prove to SBA of what you're doing. They're not mandating of what exactly it has to be. They just want to know what steps that you're doing. They're going to leave it up to your institution on how to operate that training. And let's see, we have our normal list of upcoming events. We've plugged those a lot. Next month, we're going to do one on USDA rural lending, specifically B&I community facilities. If you're not doing that, you definitely want to be a participant in that. With that, Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Lance, as always, enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you next week.
Have a good weekend.